All right, I think holidays are over, and I'd like to resume my little teaching sessions. And as it is a teaching session, if you have any questions, you can raise your hand, or even at the Kiddush afterwards, we could go into further discussion. Because what I'm going to talk about, I think, is a little arcane as far as most people are concerned. Remember, we were discussing the order of Nashim, which is in the Mishnah, one of the orders that is devoted only to women. And one of the reasons for that is that the rabbis understood that women in the society in which they lived were in an inferior position. And so laws had to be made in order to protect them. And we are quite aware that even though there are laws to protect women, abuse of women still continues, even to in our own day and age, in all sectors of society. So what does the tractate Nedarim, Vows, have to do with women? Well, it's because women in those days went from reshut ha'av to reshut ha'bal. They were in potestata paterfamilias. They were under the control of others, either their fathers or their husbands. And now we come to the question of vows. What is a vow? It's interesting because you know that there are two tractates in the Mishnah that seem to be actually almost the same. There is a tractate of Shavuot, oaths, and a tractate of vows. And what's the difference between an oath and a vow? Well, first of all, in most cases, an oath may also entail taking the name of God. You know, it's interesting, in a court of law today, you take an oath on a Bible, and you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. You know that that first came into Western law in the 1200s under Alfonso X in La Siete Partidas, his law code. Alfonso lived from 1221 to 1284, and he included, that was the first time in any law code in the West, that to hold a chayfetz, but that was part and parcel of Jews taking an oath. You took an oath either on your tefillin or on the Torah, and so that came into Western practice. But an oath is where you take an obligation upon yourself to do such and such. Strangely enough, Jews are not allowed to swear to tell the truth, because you're making God's name in vain. Why? Because you're mushba'im va'omdim mehar Sinai. Jews are forsworn from Mount Sinai to tell the truth. Any Jew who doesn't tell the truth is actually taking God's name in vain, because they are sworn from Mount Sinai to tell the truth. However, there is an oath in the Jewish law practice, which is very interesting, an oath to tell all you know. That might work in some of the lawsuits that we have nowadays. Somebody who takes an oath and makes sure that you tell all that you know about a certain thing, and that could be applied. Vows, on the other hand, a neder, are something that you abjure that you will not do. In other words, if I will give up smoking for 30 days or otherwise, I'll give $100,000 to the synagogue. Anybody wants to do that? We are willing to take that into consideration. So in other words, a vow is where you are going to abstain from something, you're not going to do something, and that is a vow. And in There's a very interesting book called by none other than Saul Lieberman, who I had the great privilege of studying the tractate of Nedarim with over 50 years ago. And what's interesting about the tractate, by the way, interesting about the tractate Nedarim, it's the one tractate where Rashi is outclassed by someone from Barcelona, Nissim ben Ruvain, known as the Ran. And it's interesting, he had a long life. He lived from 1290 to 1376, and he was the last of the great scholars of Catalonia. Most people don't understand in the history. I think they don't think in terms of what happened in Spain before the expulsion. But there was many great scholars, especially in Catalonia, which are really a source of great Jewish types of commentaries or legal scholars, whether it be the reshaped. You know, they have actually in Barcelona, they have a street named for Solomon ben Edret, the reshaped, was one of the first and the greatest of one of the scholars of that. But in this, the Ran actually is his particular commentary on the Nedarim. So vows were quite common, and what Saul Lieberman says in the Greek and Jewish Palestine is that people were vowing all the time, and the rabbis were trying to stop them. They were trying to stop them from taking oaths. Remember that it's better not to vow than to make a vow, and then you perhaps not do it. And so these were quite common at that time. And instead of saying that I will give an offering, a korban, they actually had these kinuim, these sort of nicknames, konam, if I don't do such and such. And so this whole tractate is devoted to vows and what does one do when vow and you can't do the vow. You know, it's interesting that you see a woman, and this is why it's in the tractate which deals, the order which deals with women, a husband or a father could annul the vow of a woman. In other words, if a woman says, if I don't go to synagogue every morning, I will not serve my husband breakfast. Well, right away, the husband says, no such thing. That was called hafarat nedarim. He's annulling the vow. On the other hand, if a man made a vow and wanted to have it annulled, he had to go to a rabbi or the Beit Din, and that was called hatarat nedarim, in which the vows were canceled. We all know Kol Nidre, right? Kol Nidre is where most Jews come to synagogue, right? And what does Kol Nidre say? That all vows, the one that we have in the Ashkenazim says from this day, from Yom Kippurim zeh ad Yom Kippurim haba, aleinu l'tova, from this time forward. That never was originally in the formulation of the Kol Nidre. It was changed by Rabbeinu Tam, Rashi's grandson, who lived from 1100 1170. Rabbeinu Tam changed it because in the Sephardic way it said is from Yom Kippur that was in the past to this Yom Kippur. In other words, it goes on to the past. But according to Rabbeinu Tam, now it only annuls vows that are going to be made in the future. What happens to the vows that you already made? Well, never have it done that Ashkenazic Jews could not find another way to make another ceremony. There is something that I'm sure I'm saying something that nobody here knows. There's something called hatarat nedarim, which in my misbegotten youth, I actually participated in. On the morning of Rosh Hashanah, in the old days, one had the Rosh Hashanah. The morning of Rosh Hashanah, you got up you came to synagogue around 6 o'clock, and you had all these slichot. You know, we only do slichot, Saturday night before Rosh Hashanah. You did every single day. From that time on, you had the slichot. And on Rosh Hashanah morning, you had the most longest slichot in the world. You got up at 6 o'clock, and then you had, you had the main pismon is from Rabbeinu Gershom, Noah Gola. In any case, after the service, you had what was called Hatarat Nedarim. There were 3 people would sit as judges, as a beit din, and the person would come and would have, say, this long formula where they had harata. They had remorse that they had made the vow, and so the vow would be annulled. That word came into Yiddish. If you want to say you're sorry about something in Yiddish, you say, I have chob charata. Chob charata means I have remorse, and it comes from that particular way of saying vows. The influence of saying vows actually has some residual things in, if you are among some of the more, shall I say, observant community. If someone says, well, I'll see you tomorrow, Bli Neder, without making it a vow. I'll see you tomorrow, Bli Neder, im Yirtzeh Hashem, if God willing. And that is how in every daily speech of Jews, that you say, I'm going to do something, you say, Bli Neder, without making a vow. And that's some of the influence of the Nedarim. And that tractate is filled with many different folios, and I'm sure that it's something that I hope may interest you, but something that is part and parcel of our heritage. We continue now with the Musaf Kaddish, page 150.